everyone. This is a Leadership with Heart podcast, and this is Heather Younger, your host. Employee experience is powered by emotions. Managers and or leaders within organizations get to choose which emotions they unleash from within the people they lead. Leaders, meaning supervisors or above in an organization, drive much of the positive or negative emotions by their actions or inactions, their words, or what they fail to say. When a manager chooses their words and their actions carefully, they exhibit great emotional intelligence. These managers are often thought of as leaders who care, or as I like to call them, leaders with heart. This special brand of leader drives engagement and loyalty simply by being themselves. Are these leaders perfect? Absolutely not. It is in their awareness and sharing of some of their imperfections that we realize their brilliance. In this podcast, I ask you to see yourself in the stories my guests tell about times when they were not the best versions of themselves, but how they used their hearts to guide them to a place of deeper connection with their teams and heightened leadership prowess. Enjoy. Hi, everyone. This is Heather with the Leadership with Heart podcast. And today I'm super excited to have Erik Van Bramer on the podcast with me. I've been trying to get him on for a while. He's just a unique leader. I know him personally, and I've just seen the way he leads himself, which is most important. I haven't seen yet how he leads his team, but I can extrapolate from how I see how he leads himself. And so because of what I've seen, I wanted to invite him on. So that's why you're on, Erik. It's just what I've seen of you over the years. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Heather.
So where are you right now, anyway, in your leadership journey?
So I would say probably the best answer to that question is I'm in an interesting stage of my leadership journey. For much of my career, I've been with the Federal Reserve System for about 22 years. So for much of my career, I defined my leadership journey on obtaining the next level, moving up the organization, getting more responsibility. And I use that really to kind of define how I felt I was on my journey. And I've actually, in the last couple of years, started to redefine where I felt I was on my journey, because quite honestly, I'm at a point in the organization where I'm not interested in the next level. I'm not interested in what that next step might be from a traditional sense. And so I would say that my focus now on my journey is much more so based upon being better at how I lead people. So it's not so much being judged or characterized, but how do I feel about how I'm leading people? How do the people who work on my team feel? And so it's been, I'll say, very refreshing. I think it's really easy early on in your career to kind of focus on, all right, what do I need to do to make it to vice president? What do I need to do to make it to this level? And it's been very refreshing to find myself in a place, say, I'm not interested in that anymore. I'm not interested in the external piece of it anymore. I'm really more focused on my people, the people I lead, the people I work with, and my own personal growth and development.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's got to be refreshing. And I would say too, the amount of pressure and stress that we put on ourselves to look a certain way to our bosses, and because we may be considered for the next spot up, or again, and even how we just manage people. It's different when we have that different focus. It really is. So I'm curious to know, how do you think that your people would describe your leadership style?
That's a great question, Heather. I think in general, the people I work with would describe me as flexible and passionate. And probably sometimes to a fault, that passion. I always need to check in with folks on my team and say, is my passion correctly focused and directed? Because there's no doubt that I can get passionate. And so I really try to check in with folks and say, if I'm representing us and I'm trying to represent our thoughts and our position, you need to tell me when I'm off base. You need to be open with me, or I don't accomplish what we collectively are trying to get to. And so I think it's that passion and that flexibility is probably one of the big drivers that I think people would associate with my style. From a flexibility standpoint, I think it's important, and I actually just had this conversation yesterday with somebody on my team, that there's a fine line between managing people differently and treating people differently. And what I mean by that, when I work with an individual, I try to understand what their needs are. So I tailor my leadership to their needs. So, for example, if a person needs constant feedback, I realize that, I try to focus that, and I try to give them that constant feedback. Or somebody else on my team maybe doesn't need as much constant feedback, and they're interested in big nuggets and it being, more powerful when it's received less often, because they know that there's strong intent behind it. So those two styles of individuals kind of tailor my style of leadership. And it takes some time to understand what are those people's needs. And when you work in a big organization with a large team, it's impossible to know everybody's needs. But with time, and I have the benefit of the team that I lead is an incredibly tenured group within the Federal Reserve System. We have probably an average tenure of 30 plus years on the wow. team of my team. And my team right now is over 60 people. So it's not a small team, but a lot of us have worked together for many, many years and have a great understanding of each other's needs. What that does for me is when we have new people join the team, really trying to focus some time and energy to understand those people's needs, because it's not as simple as maybe the people that I've worked with for 20 years. So I try to tailor my philosophy. I try to tailor my style to the individual without it being treating someone differently.
Well, I think when you do that, I think you show a lot of emotional intelligence.
Yeah,
because you're thinking of them, you're considering their needs versus just all about you.
Yeah, I would hope so. That's my goal. And so whether I do it all the time or not, that's definitely is my goal.
Well, that's good. And I think that's the key, right? Is that with leadership, it's a journey towards improvement, which is how you started off, about being better and getting better. And it's less about perfection. So you're aiming towards being that leader. And what we look at is usually what we walk towards, and that's what we become. So I think that's again, very emotionally intelligent. I'm sure the people appreciate it, because there's a lot of folks that don't. They lead the way they show up in the world, period. Mm-hmm. And they don't consider the motivations of the people they lead in any different categories to any extent. That's part of my mission in life, is to help people understand what it is their people need. And so it's cool to see someone who just automatically seeks that out and then tries to focus on that. So kudos for you.
I wish I could say it was easy. It's definitely one of those things I need to remind myself of. Different people are at different points and have different needs, and to be empathetic to those needs.
Yeah, it's hard to do that sometimes, right? Especially in the like a heat of emotion, or just like total chaos or craziness, or even like right now we're in this COVID thing, and it's like, oh my God, fires are popping up all over the place, and it's right now. Here's the message that people really need to know right now, if you're leading even just one person, is it's right now that makes all the difference how you show up. So if you show up in a way that's super frazzled, doesn't instill any confidence, doesn't have empathy or compassion for those and what they're living in, because we all live in different things, then that impacts what it looks like a year from now on your team. Because they're like, he or she, they didn't operate well, and they showed their colors right then. And so it's incumbent upon leaders to show up in a way that that shows those things, that later on they can reap the benefits of having to continue to have that tenure on the team, right?
Absolutely.
So I'm curious to know, where does your drive to lead come from? Because sometimes I hear different things from different people, but it ends up being for me about five things that I can count on my fingers that people say that it's their drive. And I'm curious to know if you fit any of those. So where does your drive come from?
So honestly, I think for me, maybe it's almost an easy answer in that. So I mentioned earlier, I work for the Federal Reserve System, and I am passionate about the mission of what we do at the Federal Reserve System. I think a lot of people don't understand exactly what happens at the Federal Reserve, but I have always felt a sense of pride that I work for an organization that is built around integrity. And that integrity is the final driver in almost every decision we make. And because of that, it allows me to be absolutely passionate for my organization. And what I try to do is take that passion for my organization and spread it to the people I work with, so that that same mission that we feel is so important at the highest levels of the entire organization is carried all the way through to my people. And I feel like if I can carry that passion through to my people, get them to buy in on the importance of our mission and what we're doing, that we're destined for success. And we're all, not to say we all agree with each other. Obviously, every organization we have, my boss calls it cussing and discussing moments where we all have different opinions. But I think at that highest level, that passion and belief in what we do, if I can keep that spark and keep that enthusiasm going with everyone on my team, it sets us up to be successful.
I'm curious to know, though, if that drive to lead, like just foundationally, if it comes from even further. Like, did it start young? Did you start leading at a young age, like Boy Scouts, and right? Did you? I'm curious to know, or did it just? I don't know. You weren't leading people; you were leading yourself as an individual contributor, and then you landed into a place where the mission was so strong that made you want to lead others. I'm curious to know about that.
Yeah, so I think it probably boils down to a caring about others and kind of how in my life can I impact the most people. So I think individual contributors can absolutely have wonderful impacts on an organization, on the people around them. But if I take my caring and passion for other people and wanting the best for them, and I say, how can I get the most bang for my buck to do that? It's through looking for opportunities to lead them and influence. And I feel like with that as my driver to try and do that for individuals, that I've looked for what is the opportunity where I'm going to be the most influential in other people's success. And that's been through leading people. And so as I looked across my peers when I first started the organization, I'd look at my peer group and I was like, well, it's one thing to influence your peers, but as I can grow as a leader and combine the natural ability to influence people with a little bit of authority by being the one who actually officially gets to set the tone and set the cultures, I found that I had more success in driving the culture I wanted to see. And that early on in my career, even just becoming a supervisor or 4 analysts kind of situation, that early on in my career really drove me to knowing that I wanted to be in that position of influence. So earlier when we talked about my leadership path, I think what drove me for many, many years was wanting to expand my realm of influence as much as I could. And I would do that by obtaining the next level and pushing myself. Okay, well, how am I going to get to that next spot where I'm influencing even more people? And that next spot where I'm influencing even more. And that really probably drove me for a long time. And now I'm in a position where my leadership, so I talked earlier about, I'm more focused on being better at it with my team, but I'm also then focused on how do I influence people not on my team. So going back to those original roots of how do I influence my peers? And that drive is maybe now where the other piece of my focus is.
Interesting. I'm curious to know, did that kind of caring for people and like wanting to uplift and just kind of collaborate and build a team, do you think that even goes even further back? I'm just curious, like, were your parents like that? Like, were they people who, just cared deeply for people and you always saw them gathering with groups? I'm just, it is so interesting.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think if you were to sit down with a therapist and myself and kind of dig into my childhood, you would see a family that I grew up in, which was a very loving, very close family. And everyone around me was a giver. So my father was a physician. And I saw from an early age, he was the kind of physician that if the phone rang at 3:00 in the morning, He was stumbling around looking for his glasses to help somebody. Didn't ever hesitate. My mother was a nurse who went on to become the nonprofit guru of life, I think. She founded Hospice of Iowa. She always spent her time focused on not the societal sides of being the doctor's wife, but the how do I take that influence and help my community? How do I take that and help the people around me? And so from an early childhood, I was exposed to my parents being that way. My parents being, how do I help as many people as I possibly can and get the most bang for my buck? And so I do think that empathy for fellow man and that love for the people I'm with and surrounded by, is define my community as broad as you want to, has always been there. And I think that was just the way I was raised.
I love it. And I think it's interesting because when we think about moving up the ladder in any organization, and we're focusing on the next thing in the sphere of influence, sometimes that sphere of influence is about power. And sometimes it's about control. And I'm not saying you weren't interested in either at all, but with a focus on caring and giving, it's a whole other spin on this idea of moving up that ladder, right? Because your desire to, like, how many more can I influence? How many more lives can I change in a positive way? Like that's a whole nother angle that I think that when we associate someone who's focusing on moving up a ladder, we aren't thinking of that kind of person, right? We just aren't thinking. I remember I had taken a job that I knew I probably would be laid off from. So I took it purposely, though, because I knew, like you were saying, I'd have more influence. And in that case, it was focused on the customer experience. I'd have more involvement over strategy. I'd be leading customer experience strategy for an organization, a software company. But I took it knowing that the odds are, like, within a couple of years, I'd be laid off. But it was because I wanted so badly to control the experience for customers, because at that point it was really disjunctive all over the place. And it was like, I was controlling one part, not this part. And so I felt like, wow, if I could just like have this more expansive vision, this more real customer focused way we could operate, I'm willing to take a place where I know then I'll be laid off. And then the funniest thing is I was laid off, no surprise. But then it put me on the path I'm on right now. So, and it's still a caring focus. So it's interesting that you say that. I've never heard anybody say that the way you did. And because again, most of us are just thinking of and moving up in a different way. So and it doesn't surprise me that it goes back to your childhood. So I kept digging deeper for a reason. I don't mean to be a therapist, but I kept digging deeper because I tend to find that a lot of this stuff starts at a really young age, whether it's from adversity or some parent or some mentor or something. It usually starts there. So that's awesome.
Yep. I think my family.
We can all hear how. Yeah, you're amazing. Yeah, I know. And I know that from my experience. So now we know that we can all hear now how amazing you are, and which is great, which is why you're on the show. But there's a part of this, the brilliance that comes from a leader like you, where we start to talk about a time when we weren't so amazing, maybe a time when we weren't real proud of the leader we were. And so right now I'm going to ask you to share with listeners a time when maybe you weren't the best version of you. You weren't that best leader that you could be proud of, that maybe you didn't feel like you were following that North Star of caring for people. And what did that look like? And then what did you do to kind of come back out of it and become a little bit more enlightened?
Well, I think, so presented, one of the things that drove me was always having the bigger span of influence. I wouldn't be true to myself if I didn't say that there wasn't a point in my career where I got caught up more on the big corner office. And you get to that point and you start to feel like, wow, I've made it. Look at me. And you do start looking more internal. And I probably got to a stage, some point, where I lost that North Star. I lost that guide to me, it was about influencing and caring about the people. And I had that one promotion maybe that triggered in me of, wow, that felt awesome. I was just able to go buy the new car. I got all these kudos, a nice email from my old boss. And so what do I need to do to get to that next one? And by taking my eye off what got me there in the first place, I think I had a point in my career where I wasn't empathetic to people who had been my peers, that now I had gotten to a higher position. And I forgot to think of it about how is this affecting them, and more focused on look at me and how wonderful this got for me. And once it hit me that, wow, I would counsel even the youngest manager to be wary of that. And here I am, someone who's saying, I got to these points because I care about people, and yet I'm open my eyes now and can see that I'm not thinking about some of the people that helped get me here. And it almost took a slap in the face of, wow, that was not my intent, to refocus me and get me to look back at what is that guiding star of why I wanted to be here in the first place. So without too much detail, there was probably a stage in my career where I lost some close friends. And
we don't mind detail here, Erik, at all. In fact, the details where we learn. I am curious to know what that slap in the face was, if you can share.
It was a moment where someone who I'd been really close to with as peers called me out and said, you know, oh, sorry, Mr. Big Shot now. Why don't you tell us peons what it is we need to do next? And this was coming from someone who I was very close to. And the thought that he would think that to me was, oh my gosh, I've completely lost my way. Either my first response was, well, what a jerk, right? I can't believe he'd think that. He knows why I do this. And then it was a little bit of a come to Jesus moment of, if he's feeling that way, I must have done something to make him feel that way. And so rather than blaming him, I have to look at myself and say, you know what? I have kind of gotten caught up in the fact that look at how fast my career is moving. Look at all the success I'm having in my journey. And that was a kind of a brutal moment for me. But I would also say now, several years later, that was also probably set me up to where I do more clearly, I think, see my guiding star of why do I want to do this? So when I've come to the point in my career where I'm not interested or looking for that next step up, if I hadn't had that moment, I might be frustrated right now saying, well, where's the next step? I don't see the steps. But I've now reminded myself that is not why I'm in this. And so being better with where I am and helping as many people as I can, both, horizontally as well as vertically, that gives me huge amounts of, makes me want to keep going. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thanks for sharing. I know sometimes those things are just so uncomfortable, but it's those that are listening in who may be in the exact same situation or approaching that or whatever. There's just some way that they'd get a little inspiration from it. So that's the reason why I asked that question. Mm-hmm. Okay. So for those who are listening right now, who might need a little bit of, the motivation for the day or are struggling in their own leadership, what might be a couple pearls of wisdom you might leave them with today?
I think maybe that, when you're looking for motivation, to look to others as your gauge rather than to yourself. And what I mean by that, we talk about caring about the people you work with. We talk about one of the things that I try to impart upon the people who work on my team is as they move into management roles and people leadership roles, to really focus on redefining their own success. That their success is no longer defined by how they do, but their success is defined by how the people who work with them do, their team does. And by refocusing that, I think that really kind of changes your motivation, because everybody's had that one moment where I want recognition for my idea. And that first time you truly, down to your heart, get excited that the recognition is going to someone who works on your team, even if you were part of that, because it's not about you, it's now about your team. And you truly can, with all honesty, say, I am so excited for that. I'm so excited that person got that recognition. I'm so excited that people see what I see. And you get to that point, you'll know it. And I think that's a powerful step in your journey of leadership.
Awesome. It's interesting. I'm writing a book now on caring leadership, and through all the interviews, I'm looking for evidence of what caring looks like, right? So I know what people have told me they feel like I'm that way. I can sense and I can feel because I'm an empath. I can feel those things. I can feel this person's a caring leader. But how do we pinpoint it for those who may not naturally have that caring instinct? Maybe the caring is not their North Star. So what I'm attempting to do now is to encapsulate out of all the interviews I've done with people of all industries and backgrounds, what are the, let's say, 10 things we want to focus on if you want to become more of a caring leader. And the caring leader is then the one who keeps those people on their team forever and has, when the going gets tough and it's time for everybody to hunker down and get stuff done, like in a time right now during COVID, that team that you took the time to show that you cared for is a team that rises. It just rises. And so I know this because I've lived this, but it's trying to, make sure I get it in the point where it's, crystal clear and pretty defined, hopefully to be passed to those who don't know this naturally. So you just given me some more, it's given me some more meat. Thank you for that, Erik. It's been a pleasure having you on. I'm so excited. I kept after you to get you here.
Oh, absolutely. And I've enjoyed our time together.
For those who are listening right now, if you found really good value in listening and what our conversation with Erik, please do share it far and wide. That would just be with anybody, because I think a lot of people can really benefit from some of this stuff. And also don't forget to write a review on Apple Podcasts, because that's how the algorithm brings me up to the top. And then of course they can get access to this. So do that. But thanks again, Erik. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Take care, Heather. Thank you so much.
Thanks everybody for joining the Leadership with Heart podcast. Have a great one. Thank you for listening to the Leadership with Heart podcast. You can grab the show notes by visiting customerfanatics.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter.